I became a consumer rep with UNSW staff kind of through a series of accidents and chance encounters. So when I was finishing my treatment in Melbourne over 8 years ago, I had an encounter with a researcher there who said, "You'd make a great consumer." And I said, "What's a consumer?" I'd never heard of that before. Anyway, long story short, I did some training through Cancer Council New South Wales. The wonderful Stella, who was with the Translational Cancer Research Network at the time, did a pitch for people to join the Consumer Advisory Panel, and that's really where I began. So all my earliest researchers that I started working with in 2018 were at UNSW. Being a consumer in research is a partnership with researchers. I feel like my job is to represent the people at the coalface, the people that this research may be able to impact, to share my lived experience, in my case of a cancer and treatment, but actually I'm there to represent my community, not myself. This is not about my personal journey to a full extent, it's about the collective experience. So what it means to me to be a consumer is to try to develop partnerships with researchers where the two parts of the consumer and the researcher are synergistic, and together we can create really targeted research that benefits people at the coalface. I'm lucky to have had a lot of wonderful experiences. One recent one with UNSW researchers is one lab that I've been working with for 4 years. We're at the point where they wanted to make a questionnaire to women with ovarian cancer about whether a predictive test would be useful for them. And so as myself and another consumer have been part of the team for all these years, we then partnered at a co-design stage with some psychologists who were creating a questionnaire. So we got involved in recruiting women for a focus group. We put significant input into the questionnaire design so that where they began with their rough design, plus our involvement as consumers, has resulted in a much more accessible and useful questionnaire. So to me that was really satisfying because you could actually see the outcome of your direct input. Well, there are a few commonalities when consumers get together and we say what our problem is. The biggest issue for me and for many other consumers is when we're approached by a researcher really late in the day, literally, where we haven't formed a relationship with them, and the first interaction we have is, "Oh, we need a consumer because we've got a grant submission that was kind of due yesterday, so can you quickly have a look at this and sign off that you're happy to be involved with this project?" And that's such a missed opportunity. We kind of refer to that as tick in the box consumer engagement, so that we don't really know much about the research except for what we're reading on the submission, and the researcher knows nothing about us and what we can bring to the project. So when we're asked for feedback that late in the process, it's not usually taken on board because there's no time. What can sometimes come out of those less satisfying engagements is you may never hear from that researcher again. I've had times when a researcher hasn't got back to me to say, "Sorry, thanks for your involvement, but our grant application wasn't successful." So when you're kind of left hanging, and sometimes I have contacted a researcher to say, "Hey, I haven't heard from you in a while, what's going with the project?" Crickets, hear nothing. So, consumers are usually people with quite busy lives. There are a lot of retired consumers who seem to be busier than the rest of us. But when I'm trying to fit this in around a day job, putting that work in and getting no feedback back or feeling like you've made no difference is really dissatisfying as a consumer. I'd really encourage researchers who are new to working with consumers to form a relationship with them before you're asking for them to do something, to actually take the time to get to know them and for us to understand your passions. What led you to this research? What would you like to get out of consumer engagement? How can we enhance your outcomes in any way. So forming that relationship first, rather than be a tick in the box researcher consumer, would make a huge difference. And when that happens, really amazing things happen, because consumers often come with not just their lived experience, in this case of a cancer, but also we have other skills in our lives that might be useful. We might be able to help promote your research on social media, help you recruit for a focus group, and be a cheer squad. You know, we want you to succeed. We're on your team. I've found personally that having a bit of space between my diagnosis and treatment and getting involved as a consumer helped this be less personal, in the sense that it's a very personal story I have, but it's not about me desperately trying to find a cure for myself or a loved one. I find it useful to be part of the community that you're representing. So I've become more involved in the ovarian cancer community and got to know so many women and their stories and their struggles, so I can be more representative. But I've also got to remember that, unfortunately, most consumers are white, middle class and middle aged, and we've got to represent a much broader community. So if we haven't got an available consumer who's from a migrant background or a CALD background, or as Indigenous, or lives regional, rural or remote, we need to take their needs into account and represent them when we're giving feedback.